Hello, my name is Doug Gray. I want to talk about how to increase engagement, not only for you, but for others. And perhaps a place to start is for you to think about two hats. Imagine yourself as both a scientist and as a practitioner. The science is what we've just focused on. This is the what we know section. I think it's time to move on to how do I help myself? Think of that child, that cute kid who looks in the mirror and has an openness, a curiosity about the world. Perhaps you're thinking of yourself, your children, your neighbor's children. Maybe that child isn't easy for you to recall. So let's start with a little assessment, as if you were that kid. So, negative scores are just fine. -3 to neutral is a reasonable number. Neutral to +3 is a reasonable number. What do I mean by this? Well, I've got a negative assessment of my interest in things like mixed martial arts. I don't understand mixed martial arts, but I played hockey in college, so I do understand other sports. I don't understand opera, but I do understand other music, and I appreciate that. In a similar way, here are 3 questions, and I want you to model engagement by writing down how engaged do you intend to be in this content. Somebody else could have forced you to read this or view this course, or somebody else could have expected or required you to. It might mean you're resistant. That's the scientific hat that you're wearing. And the scientific hat's okay. Negative numbers are just fine. Second question. How much risk are you willing to take with this content? For instance, if I shared with you some science or methodology or practice that is evidence-based and we know is critical, it works, would you be willing to try it? Negative numbers are fine. And third question, how much do you care about your relationships with others? I'm not wanting this to be a loaded question, though it might seem it, and it might seem judgmental. What I mean is, to the extent you care about other people, you'll care about the remainder of this course. Not every person cares about other people. It's a bit of a myth to think that everybody does. So what am I getting at? Remember, this is all about how do you assess your own engagement. There's an assumption in positive psychology, which is really what we're talking about now. And the assumption is other people matter. Those 3 words. OPM does not stand for other people's money. It's other people matter. So here's an image. I wonder what it would be like to walk into the sunset or your horizon or the end of your career with a loved one, as if these 2 folks are a future self for you and your loved one. And if you were to walk into the future in that way, what would be important to you? I don't want to sound creepy or weird, but this is a critical question because our future state can inform our present state. And that's what coaching is really all about. Who's the future person you want to be, and how do you get there? Well, to get at this question, the self-assessment question, I think it might help to start a little bit with a conversation about the history of positive psychology. That's what the PP stands for. So up until 1998, most psychologists who are focused on explaining the world, why do we do what we do, behavioralism and such, and understanding human behavior is a critical question. They were focused on mental illness using the medical model. Why? Because we needed to. There's evil in the world. There's world wars. There's violence. And how do we explain those things? So anxiety and depression became a focus of a lot of research. In fact, 65% of the research described in this way using the DSM to assess, what, 1/3 of the American population? Don't quote me on that, but the idea is a significant number. The good news is we have great data from all that research. Critical behavioral therapy works, and we know how. We know methodologies and protocols to help people respond to the stresses in their lives. We know how to use a self-help book. It's as effective as critical behavioral or uh, cognitive behavioral therapy. And we use these on a regular basis. So there's value, massive value in all that work. But in 98, a bunch of psychologists got together and they were called upon by their colleagues in science to say we need a more balanced view of the research. 65% focusing on negative stuff is not helpful. So let's take a more balanced view that looks at questions like how do we flourish? Or what makes for a meaningful life? And if we ask some of those questions, what would the corresponding map look like instead of the DSM? Would it look like something like this? And I'm excited to tell you that this is 20 years of science with a very long history throughout literature and philosophy and religion. But 20 years of science that's evolving into something that some think is more of a bigger umbrella for all of psychology, and all the things that we currently study might become subsets of this. I'm not pushing that agenda, but I am here to tell you that there's a lot of free research available, and one place to go is VIA character.org. There's a number of free assessments there. You can determine what your signature strengths are, one of these 24. Another great resource for free content is AuthenticHappiness.org. At the University of Pennsylvania, there's a guy named Martin Seligman who's pretty famous, and he recently authored this book. It took him a long time to write this because he was the head of the American Psychological Association at the time in 98, who responded to his peers and said, look, we need to take a more balanced view. Seligman at that time had been studying behavioralism, learned optimism, became a common phrase in our culture. He's moved on and now is regarded by many as the catalyst or grandfather for this whole topic. So there's Marty's picture. Let me get mine out of the way. And let me tell you that the PERMA model of positive psychology is critically important. It's a way to describe 5 sets. Think of them like my hand. So one of these is more subjective, which is why positive emotions is offset. The other 4, E, R, M, and A, are objective. Let me explain it this way. Engagement, the topic of this session, is all about finding flow, and I'll explain more about that in just a moment. Relationships is quality and quantity of our meaningful relationships. They've got to be authentic connections. Meaning and purpose down here is a critical driver of flourishing. Think of why you get up in the morning or the reasons why you work, who you serve. It could be loved ones or children. It could be a noble goal. It could be your faith. Who knows? Political action. There's plenty of reasons for folks to explore this science. And remember, these aren't like a theory that somebody made up. You know, Freud and Jung made up stuff in a sense to explain the world at that time. Thankfully, we needed it. It got us here. But these are 5 clusters of research that nobody's made up. They've evolved from the scientific literature, largely since 98, so it's pretty recent. So achievements, what are the things that give you a sense of accomplishment? That opening slide where I had a bunch of logos from different places where I've worked and learned, that's an example. So what if we thought of these 5 things, the PERMA model, as a way to describe the world? More specifically, what if we use them to measure the work you're doing? The easiest thing to measure is engagement. So E stands for engagement. This guy, Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, is very famous, just like Marty Seligman. An interesting story. As a Hungarian who sought refuge and came to the University of Chicago and then Claremont in California, did a lot of research on challenge over skills. To what extent are you challenged in your tasks, and to what extent do the skills match those challenges? For instance, if you asked me to do a formulaic, I don't know, calculus, I would feel anxiety. It's a high challenge. I have low skills, so I would be right up here. Conversely, if you ask me to, I don't know, write a paper, I've got high skill, low challenge, depending on the topic, I could feel some boredom. So what am I, how are we using this notion of flow? Flow is that balance in the middle. Think of it as what you choose to do during your hobby time. If your hobby, for instance, is playing guitar, hours might pass by. If your hobby is, shooting basketball hoops or hitting a golf ball, singing in a church group, reading with others, that's flow. That's the state of flow you experience, and time goes on and on and on, and you don't really realize how much time has passed. And we use words to describe these commonly. Here's the same chart with some of those words. Flow is up here. When you feel anxiety or worry or apathy, please just take them as data, as descriptors of the challenges over the skill. This is you as the scientist. In fact, if I were to encourage you to assess these things, it would lead to maybe one of the most important slides here. And this is in the handout as well. So let me put it down here. Signature strengths were articulated conceptually by Chris Peterson, and Marty Seligman, whom I just mentioned, back in 2004 with a whole flock of graduate students. They asked the following question. It's right here. What would a meaningful life look like? In fact, if we were to look at a meaningful life in many cultures across time, as a species, we've got, 4,500 years of data from Babylonian cultures to your Facebook posts. And we could take all that data and we could look at it in cross-cultural ways. We could look at Western views from Aristotle and the Greeks, or Eastern views from any Buddhist or religious scholar you want. And we could track over time how people answer this question: what makes for a meaningful life? And that's where these 6 blue virtues come to mind. The word virtue is sometimes used in conversations about what makes for a virtuous life. Wisdom and knowledge, justice, temperance, transcendence, humanity, and courage are the 6 categories that these folks have defined. Why is this important? I know it's critically important because it leads to a glossary, a vocabulary, a way for us to express who we are at our best. Wouldn't it be amazing if you had an identity tag at the next conference you go to and it says, "Hi, my name is Doug and my top 5 signature strengths are creativity, love of learning, honesty, gratitude, hope." I've got such a name tag. I've used these for years. And 4 million people have assessed their signature strengths. Today is July 19th, 2017. That number came from Neil Mayerson because the Mayerson Foundation funded the following website. Write this down: VIA character.org. VIA, Values in Action, character.org. Unbelievably helpful. So what's going on? People are beginning to use language to describe their strengths, not only in their conversations with others, but they're beginning to think about how they can leverage their strengths to be more engaged in their jobs. Well, I might be making an assumption here that you're not willing to follow. For instance, I was taught that we need to assess my weaknesses, determine that gap, scale to the gap, and square pegs fit in round holes. Doug needs to learn whatever. Now we know that's not an effective way to motivate people or increase engagement. In fact, it's a terrible way to do that. Instead, we know that when you leverage your strengths, you can increase engagement. Well, that implies we need to determine what our strengths are. So think of these 24 words as the glossary that you could use for the remainder of your life. This could be on your email signature. This could be an opening activity in your next team meeting. In fact, this could be a way to meet people and connect well with them. So in sessions, I ask people to put a mark next to what they think are their top 5 signature strengths. There's nothing sacred about this. We know from other studies that more than 7 or 8 is just too many cognitively, but come up with 5, your top 5, and we'll run with those. So the question might be, if you identified your top 5 and shared with somebody else, what would happen? Neurobiologically, what would happen? Well, neurobiological patterns are pretty well defined. Here's one image of trust and distrust and where it happens in our prefrontal cortex and the older part of our brain back here is all about survival. Thank goodness it is. This is the prefrontal cortex that says, essentially, think about it, Doug, slow down. But this is the part that says, I have evolved from millennia, I guess, from people who are really good at worrying about their survival. Thankfully, all my antecedents were really good worriers. What does that mean? That means they don't trust strangers. That means they're cautious. And oh, I'm so thankful they are. Because then I can make a quick assessment, a judgment. Yes, we are judgmental as a species, and yes, it's critical to our survival. And when I make that judgment, it will help me increase engagement. So, how quickly do we do it, and what's really going on? We do it in less than a second. Think of it as a dance back and forth between trust with oxytocin and distrust with cortisol, and it happens this way, and it happens this way, and it happens throughout our brain because we're innervated. Yes, women have a better developed corpus callosum in the left hemisphere and right hemisphere. Differences are a factor. But in less than a second, all of us have this dance that helps us determine who to trust and who not to trust. So we've gone from part 1, the first question, what do we know, the science, to part 2, which is the second question, how do I help myself? So I'm here to tell you your first assessment is probably pretty accurate, and when you leverage your signature strengths, you can be very effective. What are your next steps? Action leads to learning. So contact me, share these slides broadly. Let me add, if you go to my website right there and click on the YouTube thing, there's a really famous guy named Doug Gray. It's not me. He's the lead singer of the Marshall Tucker Band, and on YouTube he's got a number of videos. So scroll well below his videos and you'll find mine. And there's some there that might be useful for anyone. So don't make this a passive topic. Engagement is a dynamic topic. It's a lagging indicator. What you choose to do in your interactions with other people, because other people matter, will define the outcomes ahead. Let me leave you with 2 examples. I've got a client who starts every meeting now with an appreciation activity. He uses the specific examples that are true and he uses the names of those people to drive change in his work group. It's had a profound effect. Think of it maybe as an experiment that you could do if you wished ahead. The second example is really so available and ought to be free and easy, but I think we forget it sometimes when we're not acting at our best. The example is to express appreciation for people in the form of gratitude. When I recognize what other people do for which I'm grateful, everything shifts. I'm focused on others, I'm using specific examples, and I'm helping them think of themselves in a better place as well as myself. Expressions of gratitude are the biggest predictor or descriptor of flourishing. If we go back to that first slide, Science is over here, practice is over here. Think of them as a bridge on two shores of a river. If the river is human flourishing, science reaches out, practice reaches out, they inform each other, and we create some kind of a bridge. That's where we're headed. All the best to you. Let me be a resource if I can help in any way. My name is Doug Gray.